Good evening, good evening, good evening. I am Jewel, your host. Today we have a special guest, Elizabeth Yarnell, who is the traditional naturopath. She is a MS, multiple sclerosis expert, and this is a new season, everyone. A new season with new guests and people who I like to bring on this season so that because we are alternative integrative therapy, and I also uh, would like to bring more awareness, create a better community where people can come on and ask questions, and hopefully we can get several on a panel. But for right now, I would like to bring on Elizabeth Yarnell.
Hi, Jewel.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Simply Jewel Atypical Podcast, where we are atypical of the average. And
I love it.
thank you. And what's going on here today is that I really resonated with your story. I know that we all are trying to find alternatives and natural homeopathic remedies in addition to what people are already doing. But since we are in these unprecedented times, I felt like it would be beneficial to bring you on, and perhaps you can tell us your story, your expertise. But I'm going to just let you have the floor and take it away.
Thanks, Jewel. So, I guess let me start at the beginning. My journey one night when I went to sleep as usual, and I awoke the next morning blind in my right eye. And it turned out that I had multiple sclerosis. So, again, this was 1999, so quite some time ago. Um, One of the first things I learned was that 80% of MS patients will be in a wheelchair and experiencing significant disabilities within 10 years of diagnosis. So back in 1999, I was about 2 weeks from my 30th birthday, and I really didn't like the thought of my 40th birthday being in a wheelchair. And that's really what started me down this whole path of natural health. I asked my doctors, I said, is there anything that I can do to make my future better and stay out of that wheelchair? And they said, mm, there's not really much you can do. In fact, they showed me a chart on the wall that had a downhill slope on it. And they said, this is the path of multiple sclerosis. And you might be starting out up here with a lot of abilities and doing really well. And you might be able to stay up here for a little while, but you're still going to end up at the bottom of this slope, just like everybody else with MS, severely disabled. And I thought, that is the most depressing thing I've ever heard. I can't just go home and sit around and wait to become disabled. This isn't part of my DNA. So it was my then fiance, now my husband of 20 some years, who suggested, maybe it might have something to do with my diet. And I sat down and I had to give it a good think. And I thought, for the decade of my 20s, I had lived alone, and I either ate fast food or I skipped a meal or I just didn't eat. So I guess I just said that twice. Or I ate leftovers. And the only staple foods I kept in my apartment at that time, really for the whole decade, were Crystal Light, Diet Coke, and gummy bears. So maybe not such a huge surprise that at the end of this decade that my body would fail on me. And if we look back on what I was eating, no nutritious value, no nutrients at all, really just all toxic chemicals. So I thought, okay, well, I can change my diet, except for my MS doctors shrugged it off. They're like, yeah, everybody should have a healthy diet, but they couldn't tell me what that meant. And they were pretty positive it wouldn't do anything to affect the course of my disease. So I started doing research, and I studied through the ADA and the Mayo Clinic. And really, what all of these noted resources seemed to be agreeing on was that whole foods are better than processed foods. And I thought, okay, well, if I need to follow a whole foods based diet in order to stay out of a wheelchair, I think I can do that. But I don't know how to cook. And um, I don't really know what a whole foods diet still means. So I started taking cooking classes and watching the Food Network. And what I quickly realized was that when you prepare foods from scratch, which is really what a whole foods diet means, because a whole food is a food that is in the same form as it was when it came off the tree or out of the ground or even off the animal. It hasn't been adulterated or mixed in with any types of preservatives or additives or other ingredients. And once I started learning how to do that through my cooking classes, I realized that having a whole foods based diet is super time and labor intensive. And fatigue is a hallmark of multiple sclerosis. And so it really wasn't going to work for me if I had to spend hours and hours every day preparing my foods and then only to face a huge cleanup job in my kitchen as well. If you have been preparing food from scratch, you'll understand why convenience foods were invented because women used to spend their whole lives in the kitchen. So
Well,
this is, yeah.
I do like to cook, so I think that's, but so you didn't know how to cook, so you found a better way for yourself.
Well, I didn't know how to cook until I started taking cooking classes.
No, okay.
And then I took a number of cooking classes and even became a cooking instructor for about 15 years. So I am a pretty good cook. And in fact, what was bothering me was how much effort it was taking to prepare all the food because I didn't have that much energy because I had MS.
Oh,
So
yes.
one night, my husband and I were watching late night TV, and it was in the days before we had cable TV. So there were about three stations. And on one of the TV stations came this infomercial. And this guy says, look, I can prepare your entire meal with this one countertop appliance. And he puts in dry rice and a can of tomatoes, and then he puts a metal grill barbecue type grate over it, puts chicken breasts on top of that, another metal grate, and then puts brownies on top of that, covers the whole thing with a dome, plugs it in, and turns it on. And I thought, wow, that is brilliant. I want to be able to prepare my whole foods based meal in one appliance, one pot, but I don't have that countertop appliance and I don't have any of those metal grates and I don't really care about the brownies. And so I went over to my oven and we had just received as a wedding gift a cast iron Dutch oven, just a little bitty small one, a 2-quart size. And I thought, I bet that countertop appliance in that TV commercial probably goes pretty hot because it looked like things cooked pretty quickly. So I turned my oven up to 450 degrees. And again, I'm not a professional chef. If you are a professional cook, you know that the only things you really cook at 450 degrees are like breads and pizzas. But I didn't know. So I went over to my freezer and I had some frozen fish fillets, fish at 450 degrees, and put them into my cast iron Dutch oven and thought, I'm just going to layer things in. I don't have those metal grates, but I'm going to kind of do it in the same idea that the man on TV did it. And I put in some vegetables and the frozen fish fillets and some herbs, and I covered the whole thing with the lid and put it into my 450-degree oven. And in about half an hour, it just started to smell like dinner. And that
Oh,
just became the way that we cooked. And I didn't really think that much of it until my college roommate came to visit for a week. And at the end of the week, she said, would you please teach me how to cook like you cook? And I said, well, there's really not that much to it. You saw what I do. I just like throw the food into the cast iron Dutch oven and put it in the super hot oven. And she said, I think there's a little bit more to it than that. And I thought, okay. So I sat down and I wrote out a cookbook, which is called Glorious One Pot Meals. And it introduces this method of cooking. And I spent 5 years trying to find an agent and a publisher to publish it for me. And I have a stack of rejection letters that pretty much all say the same things, that this is a great manuscript, but nobody's going to buy a cookbook from a nobody. You're not Martha Stewart with an empire. You're not Rachel Ray with a cooking show. You're not even Wolfgang Puck with a restaurant. And I thought,
wow.
this is so frustrating. So I decided to go ahead and self-publish in the late 2005. And in the
Nice.
meantime, I had actually applied for a patent. You can get a process patent. And the patent office took 3 years, and they came back and they approved my patent. They said, we can't, just like me, they couldn't find another example of the technique that I was describing being published anywhere. And so I received a patent for it. I became an accidental inventor, I consider myself.
Very
And
nice.
and then published my cookbook. And I was turned out to be really glad that I went ahead and self-published. In the first month, I sold out of the first print run of 2,000 copies. I made the local bestsellers list for months and months on end. And I ended up selling about 15,000 copies on my own before it was picked up by Random House and republished under the Clarkson Potter imprint.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Now, was this food, um, so it helped with your MS, and how did you correlate the two?
Yes. So one of my mottos is whole foods are better than processed foods. And
Right,
that extends to um, really all the chemicals and toxins that are in our atmosphere from living in our industrialized world, which I believe is a big factor in multiple sclerosis and a lot of other autoimmune issues as well.
right.
And in 2014, I gave a TED talk about this very topic where I talked about all of these toxins and additives and synthetic ingredients that are have really contaminated our food supply and can cause all sorts of systemic dysfunctions in people who are hypersensitive, and people who have tipped over into autoimmunity are by definition hypersensitive.
Absolutely. Yes, and that's good, and that's what I promote, health and wellness, trying to get people to eat natural. But I'm gonna have to check out your book because I'm interested to see what all's in there as far as helping those, who have been diagnosed with, MS. Very nice.
So the
Now,
cookbook is not just for people with MS. It's really for anybody who wants to improve their health, because if you are used to living on a diet of fast food, that is full of all sorts of chemicals that could be affecting how you feel and function. Even if you're getting a coffee at Starbucks every day and you're
yeah.
getting, say, vanilla flavor or a macchiato or something, all these different things in it, those are all chemicals and additives that could literally be keeping you crippled.
Exactly. And let's talk about that. The immune system, that was something that the natural pathway, and the inflammation. Can we talk about that? Um, how, what can you tell us about that part of your journey or book?
No, absolutely. So I went on and I continued studying and became a traditional naturopath. And I'm also what's called a certified LEAP therapist, LEAP, which means I'm certified in oligoantigenic dietary therapy. That's just a super fancy word to say anti-inflammatory, personalized anti-inflammatory dietary therapy. And what I learned along the way was exactly how our immune system works. So when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, my MS doctor told me, well, MS is an autoimmune degenerative disease that happens when a subset of white blood cells called T cells go rogue. They start responding and setting off the inflammatory cascade in your body to nothing. In fact, we consider it to yourself. The definition of autoimmune is allergic to yourself. But the more I thought about autoimmune and allergic to self, the more it didn't make sense. It's like an oxymoron. Evolution says, no, if you're allergic to yourself, you would have died out. You could not survive as a species if you are allergic to yourself. So, therefore, what I had to recognize and what I learned to recognize was that the T cells, that subset of white blood cells, they're not actually going rogue. They're doing their job. They're actually acting rationally. Their job is to protect the body from foreign invaders. Well, typically, foreign invaders are virus or bacteria or maybe even mold or heavy metals, but there is something there. What I have found in multiple sclerosis is that the foreign invaders are not usually virus or bacteria or even mold or heavy metals, but more often they're a combination of hidden parasitic infection and hypersensitivities to different common foods and chemicals that can be triggering the constant chronic immune response. And
And
really, it's okay. Go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, because see, I was born with allergy asthma. And so there were no parasites. At that time, they didn't know to look for parasites. But when you mentioned that, uh, you said nobody could be allergic to themselves. So when it affected the MS, how did you correlate the IGs with MS, or how what did you do when you first found out you were diagnosed with MS?
So that's a lot of questions there. What did I do when I was first diagnosed? Well, that's when I first started changing my diet and cleaning up my environment.
So your immune system, you were cleaning up your immune system?
Well, I was trying to bring my immune system back underneath the autoimmune tipping point. So if we can think of the immune system like a bucket, and this bucket can hold all kinds of assaults and insults, and that can be anything from Tylenol or aspirin to other pharmaceuticals to recreational drugs to lack of sleep to virus to bacteria to mold. All of these things go into our bucket for the immune system. And normally the way that our immune system works is it continually deals with all of these things and keeps that level in the bucket low enough. But when your bucket fills up and starts to overflow, that's when you tip over into autoimmunity and chronic inflammatory issues. And so to bring that level in the bucket down enough where you're not constantly reacting to everything takes a lot of effort.
Right, right. Well, I grew up allergic to everything. So that's how I got into biology, chemistry, and due to the IGs and trying to understand it. So there's so many different ways. So once you
Well,
found,
let's just elucidate for our listeners what are IGs. So IGs are antibodies that are created when the white blood cells, when the T cells come into contact with a bacteria, right? Because antibodies, they are created to handcuff themselves to a bacteria so that
right,
that bacteria can be eradicated and then flushed out through the lymphatic system. But
right,
what I look at are things that don't create antibodies because I
okay,
find that some antibodies are very, very reliable. IgAs, those are the antibodies that people have when they're allergic to peanuts and they're going to die if they eat a peanut or shellfish,
right,
things like that. But IgGs and IgEs are kind of inconsistent. They can come and go, and they may or may not correlate to different triggers or even to symptoms. You can have IgGs or IgEs and you don't have any symptoms. And in fact, now that we're so educated about the COVID vaccine, and we know that when you get the vaccine, what that does is that stimulates your body to create the antibodies against COVID to protect you, right? So therefore, if you have those IgEs and IgGs, you should be protected against those things because that's what antibodies do. So I don't find that a very effective indicator to even look for. I rely on a food sensitivity test that is the gold standard of food sensitivity tests and chemical sensitivities. And it's called the MRT, the Mediator Release Test. And unlike the every other test that looks for antibodies, the Igs, this one looks for mediator release. So the most famous mediator we all know is histamine. So we know if we have, say, a poison ivy encounter or a bee sting, and we take an antihistamine like Benadryl, that we can get some relief from the inflammation, the swelling that is causing the pain from that encounter. Histamine is only one of 80 or more mediators that the blood can release upon exposure to what it deems to be a threat. When you become hypersensitized, those of us with autoimmune issues are, your body can start to react to things that shouldn't be threats normally. For instance, one of my most reactive things is lettuce.
Okay. See, and mine was coffee, green beans, bananas, fish, peanuts. So all of those things, although you're speaking on MS, so lettuce, is it because it's water, more water? Or,
You can't rationalize it that way. It just happened that my body decided to become sensitized and treat it as a foreign invader. There
yeah,
are lots of other things I'm hypersensitive to, but these things change as time
right.
goes forward. And the better and the cleaner you can keep your body and your environment, the stronger you can make your immune system, the more you can tolerate a lot of things.
Exactly. Which now I can't have peanuts, but I can have no nuts. I can have sunflower seeds, but I now can eat fish. I now can have ketchup. I now can have green beans and chocolate. So I understand the IGs, which is why I started working with those who have sensitivity, and it all depends because everybody, and I found this to be true with all the years that I've been doing it, helping myself. I find that everybody's body chemistry is different, but I also look at their blood levels. So that's fascinating. What can you tell those that have been diagnosed with MS a better way to eat? How can you help them to understand eating natural as possible? Or like, I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but I'm just trying to figure out these questions as far as helping those who are already diagnosed. They're sick and tired of being sick and tired, and they want relief. What can you tell them based on your experience?
So, the first thing I want to say is that honestly, it matters less how the inflammation is manifesting and more that there's inflammation in your body. So, any kind of chronic ailment will benefit from what I'm about to say. And the first foundational part of it is that whole foods are better than processed foods. So, whenever you have an option, instead of going for that lean cuisine, frozen food, it's much better choice to say, cook up a chicken breast or something else that is a whole food versus a processed food. The second thing I want to say is again, it is so important to start to remove the toxins from our environment. Those toxins can be anything from artificial fragrances like your dryer sheets. That's like a whole rant I won't start off on, but I think dryer sheets are absolutely evil. And in fact, a lot of these artificial fragrances, if you dig into the world of artificial fragrances, you'll learn that there are six massive chemical companies around the globe, and they supply all of the fragrances for all of our products, whether it is Pine Sol or Tide detergent or the strawberry milkshake at McDonald's. They supply all these fragrances. All of these are made by chemical jockeys in laboratories. They are not natural, and they are called artificial fragrances or even natural fragrances or parfum on labels. So these are things, even though we can't see fragrances, they are molecules. And when you take a big sniff, oh, smell that gain fresh scent on our clothes or whatever, those are chemicals that are getting lodged down deep into your lungs and can cause you irritation constantly. Um, and they're chemicals in our bodies. Our bodies did not evolve to digest, to break down all these chemicals in our world. The United States is singularly terrible at regulating chemicals. We have something like 38,000 chemicals in our society, and that includes in our food supply. And out of
Right,
those 38,000, only a fraction of them, like less than 2,000 of them, have ever even been tested for safety. The
right.
European Union, for example, only allows like 1,200 chemicals.
And here in the United States, nobody's policing the
Nobody's
FDA. And so, with that being said, which is why we always say natural, organic product, but a lot of people don't, you know, my thing is you're paying for the name, you're paying for the packaging, you're not paying for what's inside of it. So, we have to be careful on products. Now that I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to ask you about Colorado being the highest percentage of those diagnosed with MS. That was something I wanted to ask you about, but what can you tell us about as far as statistics now with MS? Because it used to be geared to a certain origin, and is it now uh, environmental? How are people contracting MS and they're saying it's autoimmune, but yet there's more uh, diagnosed with MS?
So MS doctors will tell you that the etiology or the origin of multiple sclerosis is unknown. I think that MS happens when you have chronic triggers of inflammation in your body, whatever those might be. So again, I'll just mention parasites. I think often there are parasites that are rampant in even in the United States, and they're not something that our medical doctors talk about or even look for most of the time, which is fun because honestly, parasite testing is notorious for false negatives. So it's almost not even worth it to look for parasites. But if you have parasites, which is super, super easy to get. You can get them from eating sushi, from eating uncooked pork, from swimming in a lake or a river, or even a chlorinated public pool or water park. You can get them from walking barefoot. You can get them from playing with your pet, with your dog, or cleaning out the litter box for your kitten. It is just super, super easy to pick up parasites. Once I got them from a salad bar at a Pizza Hut. Um,
Okay.
so once you have a parasite, the job of a parasite is to find a host and set up residence and multiply. It will never go away on its own. So you
Right.
actually have to address it directly to get rid of the parasite and all the eggs. Some parasites lay 2,000 eggs a day. So if you suspect, sometimes when I even start talking about parasites, it'll start to resonate in listeners' heads and they'll be like, oh, yeah, when I went to Thailand that one time and I had terrible traveler's diarrhea and it was lasted for like 3 months and never went away, or oh, that one time I thought I had food poisoning and I was really sick and then I nearly really never have been the same since. All of these could be incidences of infestation of the acute phase of a parasitic life cycle. And then
Absolutely.
you go into the chronic phase, which is just a constant or cyclic trigger of your inflammatory system.
Yes, and those that have been overseas and went swimming uh, can I totally get that. We're going to have you come back so we can chop this stuff up and help those who have MS and to help them to find a way to reduce pain. Now, that was another thing. You mentioned you don't have pain, and there are some that are still in pain. They're on an excessive amount of medication. What can you say to them?
So pain comes from inflammation. All if most if not all symptoms are due to inflammation. So where I focus on is the inflammation. Let's reduce that inflammation and then the pain will go away. It won't be there because you won't be inflamed. So um, if you are in pain, that is because you are inflamed. So it's even more important for you to start these steps of cleaning up your diet, cleaning up your environment, and if you're interested, if you go to multiplesclerosisdiet.com, you can get my top 3 things that you should never eat if you have MS or any kind of autoimmune conditions.
And let me ask you, would that be sugar? Uh,
Not necessarily for some people, but
mhm.
worse, high fructose corn syrup. So
Okay.
the artificial sugars, artificial sweeteners are much, much worse than anything natural.
So you would want to make your own spaghetti sauce since spaghetti sauce has one of the highest fructose that you bought. Like, I won't mention any names, but I know that there's a lot of spaghetti sauce that, so we have to work on that, people. We're going to have to work on diets and how to reduce the sugar. And what else do you think?
So not necessarily the sugar. I don't want to
High
demonize
fructose.
sugar.
Yes.
High
Okay.
fructose corn syrup,
No,
that is a synthetic sweetener.
sweetener.
So there are lots and lots of alternatives. You don't have to go completely from scratch anymore, especially here where we live, Jewel, in Colorado. We are kind of at the epicenter of the natural foods movement in many ways. And I can go into any grocery store in Colorado and find an organic um, jar of pasta sauce, of marinara sauce that does not contain high fructose corn syrup, or Splenda, or dextrose, or sucralose, or
Right.
aspartame. Those are all synthetic sweeteners.
Exactly. Now, I do recommend that they reduce the artificial sugars. That is one thing I recommend. But I also, for those that are in severe chronic pain, we start off with just fruits and vegetables because then they can get all of that out of their system and then add a little at a time. Keep a journal as well. So let's see, as you say, you're here to spread hope. So, can you please spread love and hope and tell the audience, um, give them some encouraging words?
Absolutely, because I am here to assure anyone who has been dealing with autoimmune issues that it doesn't have to be a death sentence, that there are things that you can do. You don't need your doctor to do this for you. You don't need pharmaceutical medications that you're paying for and dealing with the side effects. There are things that you can do yourself to change the course of your life.
I agree with that. And is there anything, any extra uh, gems or nuggets you'd like to leave? And is it okay if we have you back? Would you be willing to come back and we can come up with a Q&A maybe for the clients or customers or the viewers or the listeners who would like to speak with you? And
Yes, I would be happy to come back. In the meantime, if anyone is interested in finding out more about me, you can always go to elizabethyarnell.com. And at the bottom of the page, if you are interested in learning more about this approach to dealing with MS and autoimmune issues, you are welcome to book a complimentary naturopathic appointment with me. And I'd be happy to answer any questions and tell you all about how it works.
well, thank you. I'm going to ask you to stand by as I do the exit. Thank you for coming on and thank you for um, giving a little bit of encouragement and uh, gems and nuggets along the way. And stand by, would you please?
Yeah.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There are so many different things that you can do to reduce the inflammation from your body, reduce the pain. Elizabeth, we want to thank Elizabeth for coming on. You can also go to Elizabeth. Uh, I'm sorry about that, Elizabeth Yarnell.com. And you can also find her on Facebook. I'll put all of her information um, in the description area. Just want to say thanks for coming on. You have been listening to Simply Jewel Atypical Podcast. Have a good night. Peace and blessings, everyone.